Welcome to this demonstration video for the Mitre saw, or alternatively, as some of you may know it, the chop saw or the drop saw. This is a really great piece of kit in the wood shop, mainly because it's so versatile in doing a number of different cuts and also the different materials that it can cut. It does a range of different cuts. It can do straight cuts, it can do mitre cuts, bevel cuts, and bringing together mitre and bevels, it can do a compound mitre cut. It can also cut different materials, wood, metal, plastic, but it's not advisable to cut particularly thick, heavy metal or sheet metal that has a tendency to fly back up at you when the blade gets underneath it. The Mitre saw, because of its spinning blade, is one of the pieces of equipment that you should treat with a lot of respect in the wood shop. Both being careful and cautious around it, but also making sure that you've got the right PPE and protection in place. Of course, protective eyewear, ear muffs for the noise, and recommended but not obligatory, a dust mask as well. You should definitely use this when cutting materials like MDF that produce a lot of material into the air. Also, before you start, make sure that all loose clothing is tucked away, that any long hair is tied up in a bun behind your head, jewelry that might be hanging down is out the way and not going to get caught up in the blade. And most importantly, when doing your cutting, not to wear gloves that can get caught and sucked into the spinning blade. When approaching the machine for the first time, make sure that it's unplugged from the wall so that it's safe to work with the machine. Also, make sure that the surrounding area is generally clear of debris, and particularly if you're going to be cutting metal that can throw up sparks and embers, that it's clear of sawdust and anything that could be flammable. Once it's safe to approach the machine, you want to check that everything's tight and secure. The fence, the clamps, the bevel locks and triggers. Make sure that everything is nice and tight. Then you move on to the piece that you want to cut. Imagine how you're going to be cutting it, what the safest way of doing that is. How do you want to stand depending on which hand you're going to be using to operate the saw, and making sure that you have good visibility on the hand that's going to be controlling the piece on the deck of the saw. Only once you're comfortable with that are you ready to put the piece in and get it clamped up. The first cut we're going to do is the simple straight cut. This is where the blade cuts at 90 degrees out from the fence and does a nice square cut on the piece that you're working with. Of course, it's only going to be square if it is up tight against the fence. So here, once it's in place, you want to make sure that it's clamped in. Nice and tight, and that you've adjusted the fence behind so that it provides support for as much of the material as possible. When the wood's in place, do a dry run. Make sure that the blade is clear, and then it can run all the way to the back of the piece of wood. Once you're happy with that, you can do your cut. Very important is to make sure that you allow the blade to stop spinning before lifting it out of the piece of wood. The second cut we're going to do is the mitre cut. This allows you to cut at a precise angle, anywhere up to about 55 degrees, but most commonly done up to 45 degrees. Here, we need to make a decision about which way we're going to move the blade. Again, always thinking about where your main hand is going to be operating the blade and where the other hand is going to be holding and controlling the piece that's going to be cut. To move the blade, you unlock it, pull the trigger, and following the dial here, move around until it clicks in at the 45 degrees. Very important to lock it again. Then we can position and clamp our piece. It's also important here to check the fence. It's very easy to, at this angle, cut the fence using the blade. So move it out the way on both sides. And as always, do a dry run to make sure that you can move the blade all the way through to the back of the piece of wood. Once you're happy with that, you can do your cut. The final cut we're going to do is a bevel cut, tilting the blade at an angle to cut into the piece of wood. This takes a little bit more setup of the blade. Depending on which way you're going to tilt the blade, again, thinking about where you're going to stand and where your hands are going to be, you want to remove both the clamps and the fence using the orange wing nuts at the back. Make sure that they're nicely out of the way and secure. Then, turning to the back, you're going to unscrew the locking lever of the blade, and with a gentle push to one side, pull out the locking lever at the front. Once it's in the right position, you can pop the lock back in and tighten it up at the back. Taking a piece of wood, make sure that it's thoroughly secured. In this case, we're going to have to use a clamp. In order to make sure that it's nice and secure. Again, quick wiggle of the piece to make sure it's not going to move around or kick back as you do the cut. Now, very important to do a dry run here. Because of the angle of the blade, often things can get in the way. So very important to make sure that you've got a clear run all the way back to the fence. I'm happy with that. We can do the cut. When you've finished your final cut, it's important to unplug the machine and reset it back to the condition in which you found it. In this case, it's about unlocking and moving the blade back to the straight cut position, locking it, making sure that all the clamps and the fences are secure, and then most importantly, giving it a good clean. And that is how you use a mitre saw.